So, Doug, you arrived at the site of the future Kwai River Christian Hospital in March of 1961. What was there? What had been done in the way of preparation for your arrival?
Well, that was quite an experience because my wife Helen and I had been preparing for a number of months, and we had sent food supplies up, and much already had been done, and we were going up to two completed, newly constructed buildings. We talk about how that process went, because October was full rainy season, and that's the only time you can really get large shipments upriver. And John Sams was in charge of, not only did he decide the location, which was, he picked out a nice piece of flat land on nearby the main village, but across a little branch river called Alanti. And he then, being located in Nakhon Pathom, which is halfway between Bangkok and the Kanchanaburi area, had arranged for a building team to go upriver in October, and in a matter of a couple of months, he had also had hired people to haul gravel and sand up onto this site, separate to the builders getting there. He said he went to Bangkok and bought, I think it was maybe 70 tons of materials that they put in barges, shipped up along with the builders, and they went to work in the middle of a jungle with nothing around them, and built two residences. There was another couple who were missionaries of the American Baptist Mission Society, Paul and Winifred Dodge. Paul was an evangelist, and Winnie was a nurse. And so Winnie was my main assistant and in charge of the nursing staff, and often filled in for me if I was out somewhere using a little treatment guide that I put together for people to use when I wasn't there for the common diseases that we saw. And so these two houses were then built, and Paul and I and others in the mission team had been up there several times during this time. I had gone up prior to our moving our families up, and offloaded things from a barge, some of our furniture and food supplies into the house, and Paul and Winnie had done the same thing. The workmen who were down country, big city Thai, were not very happy being located in the mosquito-infested malaria country, right. And more than one of them had a bout of malaria while they were there. But they moved on ahead. Many of them were living underneath this newly constructed houses, which were typical two-story homes to get the house up where the breezes are.
So when you first got there were these two houses, one for the Dodges, the American Baptist evangelist and nurse, and for you and your wife, but there was no hospital yet.
Right.
But that didn't stop patients from coming to see you, so how did you deal with that?
Almost immediately. The word was around that there was this foreign doctor that had arrived. Nobody knew about him, but there would be crises. One of the very first patients happened while we had just moved in. We hadn't even moved all our things upstairs. We had kids, and not all of our furniture was moved in, and we didn't have a cooking stove. That we cooked on a charcoal stove out on a porch, on a porch that you know of, because you lived in the same house for
23 years, I guess.
And we had some storerooms down there, and the workmen had been living down there, and all of a sudden here came a man with he had blown off much of both of his hands. That's an injury that you and I talked about previously, that we both saw. The the Karen and Mon would make a homemade bomb out of a bamboo, and they would drill holes and put gunpowder in there, and a wick, and the thesis was if they threw that bomb and it exploded in the water, it would stun the fish in the river, and they would come floating up, and they would get quite a lot of fish to eat with one explosion. So everybody would be ready to dip the fish out. But the problem is, periodically, one of these bombs didn't get thrown soon enough. They would explode in the hands of the man who was trying to do it. And this man had done that, and he had actually blinded himself at the same time. And he was he was in bad shape. But here he was, and I was trying to do what I could. I put up boards on the top of a couple of I've been thinking about this even. Boards on top of a couple of barrels, laid him out there, and Winnie was there, and we finished cleaning up his shattered hands, most of which were blown off, and we actually gave him a unit of blood that one of us donated, probably me, because I'm type O and was a universal donor. Unfortunately, he had lost so much blood and went into shock that he died. And I thought, this is not a very good beginning for a new doctor in the jungle, and this is going to mean that people are going to not to be too encouraged. But you know, the attitude seemed to be they're amazed that we even tried to do anything, and that was kind of refreshing and a new look at the attitude of this community, who are pleased to have anything we did they considered modern, first-class medicine, and they never had that. Well, at any rate, that was not a good beginning, but we, right away, it was amazingly how quickly we were busy. And pretty soon I had several hundred patients coming in, and my wife Helen said, we cannot have the underside of my house with my children running around as the hospital, because whenever a patient would come, they brought their whole family, and they were the support system, because they had to cook and take care of this patient, and they needed him, and I didn't have any way of doing that. We were prepared to feed patients. In fact, we didn't, even when the hospital was going. So many times patients knew that they came and cooked the food and took care of the patient. And you and I talked about many times when you're making rounds. We ended up building a small 10-bed hospital, which you expanded to 15 later or something.
Yeah, I used to say the hospital was a 20-bed, 30-mat hospital, because when we ran out of beds, we would use mats, and at that time, in the back of the hospital, there were long-term patients getting directly observed treatment for their tuberculosis, and that increased the inpatient census, and of course they're used to sleeping on mats at home anyway, so it wasn't any particular bother to them. But yeah,
I was starting to think that when you made rounds, you could never knew quite where your patient was, because if the baby was there, he was in a sling underneath the bed, and the family was up on the hospital bed. Yeah. So they would have to tell you. They would have to remind you who the patient was.
Nurses had to be careful who they gave the shot to, the person lying on top of the bed or the person underneath, because the person underneath might be the patient.
Anyway.
So you didn't. Your wife didn't allow continuation of
that's right. So
hospital activities under the house. So where did you?
You have to do something. So there was a storage shed that we had built about 50 or 100 yards downriver, and we decided we had to turn that into a treatment clinic, and we built a little sala, temporary sala for a waiting area outside of this little
Explain
shed.
What a sala is.
Oh, don't you know what a sala is?
I do.
Which is a rest area. Well, I don't know, what would you call it in English?
Yeah, just kind of a roofed over platform where you can,
with a couple of benches for people to sit in and wait out in the shade or out of the rain. And that's where we then had to shift to medicine, and people would come and go there, and no longer were staying underneath our house. And that was what we had to work with the first 2 years. And we set up a dispensary with a pharmacy and one half of that storage shed.